And you're welcome back. Now, every year on March 8th, the world unites to celebrate International Women's Day. That's, of course, IWD. It's a day dedicated to honoring the achievement of women across all sectors of society, while also acknowledging the systemic barriers that still hinder true gender equality. It is a day of reflection, recognition, and most importantly, action. This year's theme, Accelerating Action for Gender Equality and Inclusion, is a powerful call to go beyond the rhetoric and take concrete steps towards a more inclusive world. The urgency to dismantle structural inequalities and empower women in all aspects of life has never been greater. Now, despite the progress that has been made, gender disparities persist and women remain underrepresented in leadership roles and face pay gaps and encounter biases that limit their potential in various fields. The push for gender equality is not just a women's issue, it's an economic, social, and also political necessity as well. Inclusive policies and meaningful representation must become the standard, not an exception. And so on today's show, we will be examining what real action looks like in the fight for gender equality. And we will also explore the strides women have made, the roadblocks they've also faced as well, and the necessary steps that we need to take to create an environment where opportunities are truly equal for all. And so to help us break this down, we have an esteemed panel of accomplished women, which we're going to speak to throughout the course of this hour. To begin with, we have with us, joining us live, is Babajide. She's an entrepreneur and a broadcaster, journalist. She's going to be helping us to navigate the challenges of business ownership and media representation for women. Also joining us is Evelyn Dan-Epelle. She's the MD CEO, Institute for Governance and Economic Transformation, an expert in policy and economic inclusion. Ladies, thank you for joining us, and happy International Women's Day to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with you, Ms. Babajide, and just really talk about, representation in media, right? You are a journalist. You have your own position. You're also an entrepreneur as well. Let's talk about, are women, underrepresented in media? Is it our jobs as broadcasters? Are we doing enough to platform women's voices, or or is there more to be done?
Okay, thank you. That's an interesting question, I would say, given that you and I, we are women. And I would say for once, I would feel we're well represented in the media, even though I feel like there could be more. I mean, let's talk about reporters that cover beats. We've seen women shattering glasses and taking bold and giant strides to, of course, report. And for me, generally, I feel like in the broadcast system or in the media generally, women are properly represented, but then there can be more. I would say we are not mediocres and we won't settle for less.
Thank you for that. Let me come to you and Ms. Dan-Epelle. You are in governance, economic transformation. A part of our theme for this year is acceleration, right? When we talk about gender equality in governance and economic transformation, what does inclusion truly mean in terms of representation?
Okay, happy International Women's Day. I'm happy to just look at the screen and see three women talking about women's issues. But, I was reflecting on what, just like you said, inclusion would mean for us as women. And I think that would be the allyship of men. And I'm saying that more interestingly because of the times and the prevailing situation we have in our country today. I think the most dominant topic is that of the Senate president, who has been accused by a fellow senator who is a woman of sexual harassment. And I'm talking about the allyship of men because using that as a case study and just pretty much asking questions like, what do women, or what would women, what does female leadership need in times like this? I think it would really be the allyship of men, and men that literally see women as a vulnerable group of persons that need to be protected and supported. And so when I'm thinking about inclusion, I'm thinking about having more male voices. Yes, we have women who are feminists, but I'd like to see more men identify as feminists in support of women. So yeah, that's pretty much one of the ways that I'm thinking about this. There are several other ways, but let's just leave it at that.
Right. Look, I gotta say this. I'm so glad you're bringing this up because I remember, speaking to our producer yesterday, Matthew. Big shout out to you. And it was about, for me, and I'm going to bring you to this conversation, Ms. Babajide, about male allyship. And I've always said that there's something sinister about men who are allies. I find it like a double-edged sword. I don't know why. And if I were to put a finger on it, I think that it's just. Oftentimes it's for profit. It's not necessarily for action. It's not necessarily that they're allies. They metamorphose for. There's always something. There's always an end game for it, and that's how I find it sinister. But you're saying, so when you're saying that more male allyship.
Your fears are valid. I think one way I want to put that is that men have always had a way of existing as magicians. They're able to exist in different worlds at different times, and. Taking this back, one of the biggest things that I've been hearing in the media throughout the course of the week when it comes to male allyship with that particular case, you keep hearing things like the accused is also the judge, right? Whosoever has been following that story. I think one of the most interesting things is that a person, let's take this out of the Senate and let's make this a case of ordinary Nigerian, say young woman, let's call her, Jane or whatever, and she's been sexually harassed, and she's coming out in society to say that this is my story, this is what has happened to me, and then the accused or whosoever she's accusing is then put in a position to sort of adjudge the case. I think it's quite interesting what's at play here, but I'm talking about male allyship because at the end of the day, the men are the dominant figures in the room. And if we have more men on the woman's side and men who can speak in favor of women, I strongly believe that would be the kind of inclusion that we need to be clamoring for.
Mercy, go ahead.
Interesting topic. We have interesting topics that preceded today's International Women's Day, and it's not something you get to see all the time. But then talking about men aligning with this said cause, it's one thing to align with it and to say it, it's another thing to implement most of these things, because we have men that actually talk about it maybe because they are girls, but then I feel like the problem is deeply rooted. Let's address it from the source itself. Now, Senator Natasha accused the Senate president of sexual harassment. And then this has happened. And then you see all over social media where everybody's clamoring for, she should have had fair hearing. And then, of course, the Senate president shouldn't have been the judge. But then it begs the question for me, what if it was an ordinary Nigerian? What if it was me? I do not know anybody. Let's say I speak for someone, I speak against someone, I say, I was sexually harassed. And then what baffles me in all of this is the fact that people came and they said, why did it take this long for her to speak out? And it's worrisome, really, but then it is what it is. But then I just hope that with this year's topic and saying we should talk more of action, actually, I feel like let's do more than talk. Let's support each other. That's all I'll say for now.
I'm glad support each other. But when Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan came out with these allegations, and I think that there seemed to be a disconnect between the two, right? What's really played out. So let me paint this picture very clearly, just to set the stage. This started with a sitting arrangement issue, and she called for Order 6, and she was silenced, and he talked to her the way that she did, and she was brought out, taken out of she was exited out of the amphitheater, which was the hall, the floor of the Senate. Then she granted an interview and said, this is not about that sitting arrangement. This started long before the sitting arrangement, and it's simply because the Senate president asked me to please him, and I refused to do that, and this has now snowballed into things. Ladies, how many times in our personal lives have we encountered issues like this? How many times have we encountered? I mean, it may not even be us. It may be friends.
Yes, I think I remember having a discussion with a friend, and I said at every stage we have as a lady or as a woman, we all encountered this. I was on a call with someone yesterday, and she mentioned how an 8-month baby was crying, and then the mother was on her way to take up a baby, and then she realized that the baby stopped crying, and then she walked closer to the baby, only for her to realize that a man had his manhood in the baby's mouth. That is a child. Now, it feels like at every stage in life, a woman gets to be sexually harassed. As a baby, you are in primary school, elementary school, the high grade, university. I remember she came out to say something about she felt like she was in the university where a lecturer says she should please him in exchange for grade. But in this case, she's not in the university. Now she's a senator. And it makes me beg the question, if you didn't do anything wrong to get into that position, why should you feel your fellow senator has to please you to do certain things? Which I wonder what's going on really. But then,
I mean, and that's why I wanted to set the stage, right? And we keep going, right? She's made those comments. She said that that's what has happened. Hence why that sitting arrangement boiled down to where it wasn't that. She said first of all, there are some privileges that she'd get and some panels she'd be on and some travels and things were happening very slowly regressing, the benefits that she'd get as a senator. She wasn't able to, put things on the motion paper. They was always going to be taken out last minute before we saw what we saw. It was slowly building, and that was just the melting point. And so afterwards, we saw women that you and we ladies here respect and look up to, and some other women in Nigeria look up to, and even in diaspora look up to, who have, either past and present parts of the political class and system. They have championed causes for women and championed causes for the underprivileged and the less privileged and the vulnerable society in our group. They went on a media tour to not only infantilize this woman, they referred to her as my child, my daughter, a friend of mine. They also went on to make statements sort of demeaning and playing it down, and even going as far as to say that when you're a senator, you cannot have issues of sexual harassment because you have gone past it. So we must support each other. Can the old guards, the older women, support us? Do they show real support?
So I have this saying, I don't know if it's a safe space to put out that saying, but I feel like I need more women to say to themselves, I'm not here to make friends. Right? Trying to be friends with everybody oftentimes results in these types of catastrophe where, you have to lean back on certain emotions or hoping that someone is going to champion a cause for you because they are your friends. I don't want to go into that conversation about older women because, again, trauma response shows up in different ways. Sometimes when I hear older women say certain things, about younger women who are a lot more vocal about the issues that we all are facing, I tend to just feel sorry for them in general because that might just be their way of unburdening their own personal traumas. But there's something that I've found more common, which is, would I call it the commonization of sexual harassment? Like we've commonized it to the point that I was reading a tweet, on X, and someone was talking about the stereotyping Senator Natasha, for example, and more light-skinned women would be able to relate to this a lot more, even though, sexual harassment does not have a particular skin color. But there's this idea that when a woman is, very pretty, very light-skinned, ordinarily she's, irresponsible or something. There's that stereotype that give people the idea that, she should be approached for certain types of conversations. And I think that Senator Natasha is also a victim of such. And whereas that we've commonized things to the point that even when you complain that this is not the type of attention as a woman that I'm interested in, both men and women alike would start approach that as if something is even wrong with you, because that's what is seen as generally acceptable for women that look like you, for example. So it's a lot of things that are at play. But I think just listening to you and when you were going over the problem, and I was thinking about what do I see as a trend that perhaps needs to change, and we're talking about accelerating action. I would say that rather than wait for things to snowball into some kind of show-off that then becomes more like a dramatization of real-life events, I think I'd like to see more women take action at the level of those microaggressions. So what I mean is that if, for example, you know that certain things are due you in your workspace, whether that is your travel allowance that has not been given to you, don't try to be the bigger person in that very little space and wanting to use your monies to cover up for something that ordinarily should be like a professional allocation to you or whatever. Make it known and use the right professional channels. If someone is acting like they've forgotten something, you send them an email, you copy whoever is your line manager, and you discuss it in a very professional way, and not to let things build up until it becomes like you have called it a snowball reaction, and people tend to lean on your emotions and accuse you of not being emotionally intelligent. So I would just say in terms of how to take action, maybe we need to start addressing things at the microaggression level instead of waiting for things to snowball.
Right. I mean, Dan-Epelle, you make a fantastic case of when things start to happen. But even the society itself gaslight women. You tell them, oh, it's what happens. I don't think it's that way. That's the way it behaves. Maybe you should. They would gaslight you to think that you are overthinking the situation until when we have a slow reactional society, and there's victim blaming, which you just talked about in terms of light-skinned. But let's move away from, Professor Senator Natasha Akpoti-Adwoga, and really just talk about accelerating, action, inclusion, and equality for women. As we move into a new year, as we gear up for 2026, March 8th again, inclusion for women, International Women's Day, what would be the step? What would be your call to lawmakers this time in terms of inclusivity and inclusion and economic? Listen, go ahead.
Okay, I would say we do not have equal and fair representation to start with. And I listened to someone talk yesterday, and then I had to ask lots of questions. And it started with, if we do not have equal and fair representation, shouldn't the 4% there be representing and, of course, be supporting each other? So I would like to say in accelerating action, it starts with you and I. And before we say the men alignment and before the men align whatever we are doing, I feel like it starts with you and I. And then when I say it starts with you and I, someone made a very good example of in the office or workspace, you see that a man is supposed to give a work presentation, and then he gets there and starts stuttering. You see men call him aside, and then of course they pull not punches, they just, oh guy, you can do this, you can do better and all of that. But then in the woman's world, if a woman flops with a presentation, I feel like it is only a man that would be able to talk to a woman at that point in time, because we are not ready to be criticized by our fellow women. And you get to know that this is actually deeply rooted. So we should realize that when a woman makes mistake, it shouldn't be a stepping stone for us to say, oh, it is time for you to be pushed aside so that I can fill into that shoe. Instead, we should feel like, oh, it is a woman. She's my sister. If she fails, I fail. If she does better, I do good too. So we should all come together, support each other, irrespective of whatever we do. And it starts with, of course, the higher ups, because we all look up to them.
Well, I mean, the old gods have showed their face. Sorry, forgive me. Dan-Epelle, I was talking about inclusion and the lawmakers particularly. Do we need legislation that can now, that would, because I think it passed the second reading of a legislation that would increase the permanent seats that is specifically for women to ensure that there's some sort of equity at the legislative level. Do you see this as a right step in inclusion and equity for women in governance?
Well, I welcome policies, laws, actions that seek to increase the participation of women in politics and governance. I would just say that the existing ones need to be enforced, because if the existing laws are enforced, we'll definitely see more increased participation of women. But just like a passing remark that I would make is, I want more women to know that we're not necessarily going to get an invitation to the table to come lead, or because I feel like society is not really ready for female leadership, especially seeing the way that the current women in leadership are being treated by their counterparts per se. But irrespective of that, I would say that women need to take the charge by themselves, like wake up every morning and make that decision to lead, and go out there. Change is gradual. It doesn't matter if you're leading one person or 5 people or a group of 10. Just start with very little cohorts, and network more, expand on those networks, lead in any capacity that you can, and train yourself to do bigger and better. And overall, I'd like to see women who are already in the room provide opportunities for mentorship of other women, and supporting female leaders to thrive, knowing fully well that, giving the odds stacked against women in the workplace, especially in comparison to men. So in whatever way that you can support or create those focus groups that elevate women's rights in the workplace, that would also be a welcome idea.
Yeah, I mean, ladies, it's been sublime having the both of you join us, but here's where we put the pin on this discussion. I mean, we had the entire month to celebrate women. We do hope that the conversation doesn't end for this month or this day, and it continues, and we continue to push the boundaries and continue to break the glass ceiling, or the bulletproof glass ceiling that for more women to come on to take leadership roles, and whether it's in media, politics, economics, and even just leadership roles. Well, many thanks. Thank you so much, Ms. Dan-Epelle, and also to you, Ms. Babajide. Thank you.